Start with the number that tells you everything. 21 unforced errors. 44 from the woman across the net. That woman was the defending Wimbledon champion. The 21-year-old who beat her was from Quezon City. Something strange happened at Wimbledon this year. Alex lost in the 4th round, and the tournament, somehow, got quieter without her. This is not a story about a loss. This is a story about what a person can build in 2 weeks, on the biggest stage tennis has, without ever winning the whole thing. Here's the state of the board before we go any further. The tournament kept going after she left. The matches kept being played, the scores kept being posted, the rankings kept updating, the draw kept narrowing toward its final the way it always does. But something in the atmosphere had shifted. People kept talking about the player who was no longer even there. Not the way fans mourn a favorite who exits early and leaves a gap in the bracket. The way you talk about something that changed how a room felt. Something whose absence is the first time you realize how present it actually was. Let's go back to the start of the fortnight, because none of this showed up all at once. It built, match by match. The first sign was on the practice courts. At Wimbledon, practice courts are usually for the diehards, a few rows of people, maybe a camera or two, nothing dramatic. When Alex practiced, that changed. People showed up in numbers the schedule never called for. They lined up several rows deep just to watch forehands and serve drills. The most boring version of tennis there is, because being anywhere near her felt worth the wait. Volunteers and staff who had worked Wimbledon for years said they'd started noticing the pattern. Whenever her name showed up anywhere on the day's schedule, the crowd around that court grew beyond what the occasion called for. Notice what that means. Nobody organized that. Nobody ran a campaign to get people out there watching routine forehand drills. They just wanted to be near her. Then there were the flags. If you were at Wimbledon during that fortnight and you looked past the courts to the grounds themselves, you'd have seen them everywhere. Not bunched up near her matches, but spread across the whole property. Red, blue, and yellow, carried by people who'd traveled from the Philippines and from Filipino communities scattered across Europe, and from wherever else the diaspora had gathered, because they understood, ahead of most of the wider tennis world, that something historic might be building. And they were not going to watch it from a screen if they could help it. And getting there wasn't easy. Wimbledon is one of the hardest tournaments on earth to get into. The queue is its own piece of British sporting folklore. People sleeping out on the pavement through the London night for a shot-a-day tickets that can't be bought any other way. The Filipino fans who made it into the grounds that fortnight had done exactly that. They queued, they waited, they handled all the logistics of getting themselves into a venue where tickets are genuinely scarce. They did it on purpose, because this wasn't a moment they were willing to watch secondhand if they had any say in it. When Alex won her second-round match, she leaned into the microphone and thanked the crowd in Tagalog. And the sound that came back from the stands wasn't the polite applause you hear at a tennis match. It was something bigger than that. The kind of reaction that makes even people with no stake in the result feel something. Here's the thing worth noticing. This excitement didn't stay inside one community. It wasn't limited to the Filipino fans who'd come to support her, or the tennis purists who'd been following her career for months. It spread. It reached people with no connection to the Philippines and no history following women's tennis, because a clip of her showed up somewhere in their feed, and they couldn't look away. That clip, most likely, was the interview. After beating the defending champion in straight sets on center court, the biggest win of her career, Alex stood at the microphone and didn't talk about the scoreline. She talked about being a kid, going to the courts every day after school with her brother and her grandfather. Ruffled socks, shoes that lit up when she walked, chubby cheeks, and a love for tennis that had nothing sophisticated about it. Just hitting a ball with family and enjoying how it felt. She said that for a player like the one she'd just beaten, a tough result at a Grand Slam might feel like a minor setback. For someone who grew up the way she grew up, a moment like this was everything. Then she turned the page. She looked at the crowd and said 4 words. Next round, let's go. Remember those 4 words. We're coming back to them. That combination, total honesty about where she came from, immediately followed by forward motion, isn't something you can coach into a person. It's either in them, or it isn't. It's in her. And the people who watched it recognized something real in it, and shared it, and found people who had never watched a full tennis match in their lives and made them care about what happened next. Read that last part again, because it's the whole story in miniature. Back home, that same devotion showed up as watch parties, public gatherings filled with people who had come together to support a player representing their country at a level no Filipino had ever reached before, at hours that made no sense with the London time difference. Early mornings, late nights, whatever the schedule demanded. They showed up anyway. They wore the flag. They watched together. And later, they grieved together. And then they celebrated together. Because a run like this doesn't ask permission from a clock. Now here's what most people missed while they were only watching the scoreline. Let's put the numbers in order. Because the order matters. 21 unforced errors against 44. In the win over the defending champion. on center court, in straight sets. The tiebreak in that match lasted 84 minutes on its own. Alex saved set points along the way before closing it out 11 points to 9. 2 days later, with barely any recovery time, she was back on court for the fourth round, this time against a former Grand Slam finalist, in a match that stretched past 2 hours and 22 minutes across 3 full sets. It could have gone either way. It didn't. Alex lost it. Read that sequence again, because it's not a story about one big win and then a fade. It's back-to-back, high-pressure, marathon tennis at the most demanding tournament in the sport, played by someone who was 21 years old and had never been this deep into a Grand Slam before in her life. And with that fourth-round finish, win or lose, Alex became the first Filipino player in the open era of professional tennis to reach the fourth round of a Grand Slam. That's not a consolation prize statistic. That's a record that stands regardless of how the last match ended. Let that sink in for a second. The run ended. History didn't. When the match ended, the reaction back home followed a pattern that only happens when investment is real. First, grief. The genuine kind, not performance sadness, the kind you only feel about something you actually cared about. Then, within a short time, that grief turned into pride. Not the consolation prize kind of pride people reach for to soften a loss. Real pride, because what had actually happened was extraordinary regardless of the final score. That is not a rivalry story, and it was never really about the opponent she lost to. This is a story about a ceiling that everyone assumed was there, and a 21-year-old who showed, in front of the largest possible audience, that it wasn't. Here's the part that outlasts the tournament. Every kid in the Philippines who picks up a racket from now on has a different frame of reference for what's possible. Not because someone told them it was possible, because they watched it happen. You can tell a child the world is open to them, and they'll believe it as much as words can make anyone believe anything. Or you can show them someone who looks like them, who came from where they came from, walking on a center court at Wimbledon, and beating the defending champion. That kind of proof goes somewhere words can't reach. And it changed what 100 million people understood about a sport that, until this fortnight, had never really given them a reason to claim it as theirs. Now, here's where it gets interesting, because the way Alex carried all of this attention says almost as much as the tennis did. Fame at this speed can change a person fast. It can make someone careful, guarded, performing a version of themselves for the cameras. That didn't happen here. She was the same person in press conferences as she was in encore interviews, as she was in a casual Instagram photo she posted standing next to the Princess of Wales, caption like someone just having the best week of her life, and wanting to share it. She signed autographs because she wanted to, not because someone told her to. She showed up to practice with the same approach she brought to match days. Other players talked about her the way you talk about someone you genuinely like, not someone you're professionally required to be nice to. That's a different kind of compliment, and it's one that matters more. She wasn't trying to be authentic. She was just being herself. At this level of attention, that turns out to be one of the rarest things a person can do. The tennis world noticed real things about her game too, things that will shape how opponents prepare for her going forward. Her movement is exceptional. She runs down balls other players at her level would give up on, and she does it without looking desperate or scrambling. She reads where the ball is going before it gets there. That anticipation doesn't show up in a stat sheet the way a big forehand winner does, but it's a real weapon. And it wasn't just her legs. Her tactical intelligence was on display all fortnight in the way she built points instead of just hitting through them, using pace, spin, and direction to move opponents into positions where their own aggression turned into a liability. It makes opponents hit one extra shot they didn't want to hit. And at the top of the sport, that's usually where the mistakes come from. There's also a clear place where she can still grow, and it came from one of the most respected voices tennis has ever had. Martina Navratilova pointed out that Alex's serve is running well below its ceiling, that she has the physical tools to hit it faster than she currently does, and that she isn't yet using the natural edge a left-handed serve gives her against right-handed opponents. That's not a criticism thrown out for its own sake. That's a blueprint, coming from someone who built a legendary career on exactly that shot, and who knows firsthand what that gap costs in the biggest moments of the biggest matches. So here's the question worth sitting with. What happens next? The hardcourt season starts in Washington in late July. The U.S. Open follows in late August, the same tournament where Alex won the junior title back in 2022. Only now, she walks into that draw as a player every single opponent takes seriously and prepares for, by name. She heads into that stretch with the confidence of someone who has been tested at the deepest level of the sport and held up, backed by a community of supporters spanning multiple continents who will be following every point. And with a technical gap so clearly identified, the 3 weeks between Wimbledon and Washington may be the most purposeful practice stretch of her career. The Wimbledon final will still happen. Somebody will lift the trophy. The tournament will crown its champion the way it always does. But the conversation that followed Alex out of those gates when her run ended, the conversation about what she built there, about what she changed, suggests that this particular story isn't going to fade the way most tournament results do. Most players, even very good ones, play their matches and go home, and the tournament closes back up around the space they used to occupy without much lasting trace. That's not quite what happened here. What Alex changed about what Filipino tennis means, what she changed about the ceiling young players across Southeast Asia believe is real, that doesn't fade on the same schedule as a result does. She walked into Wimbledon 2026 as one of the most promising young players in the sport. She's walking out of it as something different, not just a prospect anymore. A presence, a player who fills up practice courts, who gets standing ovations after a loss, who has people setting alarms in the middle of the night halfway around the world just to watch her play. That's not something you win in a single match. That's something you build over years, and she's been building it. So here's where we leave it, because nobody watching this knows what happens in Washington, or at the US Open, or in whatever comes after that. What we do know is what she said the moment the biggest win of her life was still warm. Next round, let's go. If that's the standard she's set for herself, the next round is already on its way. If you've been following this run with us, drop a comment and tell us where you were when she beat the defending champion. And if you want to be here for whatever Alex does next, in Washington, and at the US Open, hit subscribe, because this is not the last time we'll be talking about her.